First of all, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Terry Pickering. I'm sheriff here in Bastrop County, and I want to extend my appreciation for y'all being here today. With me, I have representatives from Texas Highway Patrol, Department of Public Safety, Texas Rangers, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, our Bastrop County District Attorney's Office, and some of my staff here in the Sheriff's Office that have been involved in this case. In light of the fact that of everything y'all have reported up to this point, this is probably going to seem anticlimactic and a little mundane, but essentially we're here today to announce or confirm the arrest of two persons in regards to the murder investigation of Samantha Dean and her unborn child, Madeline. Former Austin police officer VonTrey Clark was taken into custody pursuant to an arrest warrant for the offense of capital murder at 12:03 a.m. on today's date at Austin Bergstrom International Airport as he arrived from Indonesia in the company of federal agents. Mr. Clark is currently in the Bastrop County Jail where he's being held without bail. Yesterday, another warrant of arrest for the offense of capital murder was delivered to a Kevin Leo Watson, who is currently in the Harris County Jail on unrelated drug charges. The bail on the capital murder charge for him is set at $1 million. If you'll recall, earlier y'all have reported, we've announced, and y'all have reported some previous arrests in regards to this investigation. Kyla Fisk, who is in the Harris County Jail where she's charged with tampering with evidence, and Mr. Aaron Lamont Williams was charged with retaliation and had been booked into the Bastrop County Jail, is currently released on bond. I would like to personally and publicly thank my staff, the Austin Police Department, the Texas Department of Public Safety, the Crime Lab staff, and especially the Texas Ranger Service, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Kyle Police Department, and all the other law enforcement agencies that have played a role in this investigation. Our relationship and partnerships with these entities is something that's been cultivated over the years, and has really allowed us to work together, and I think it's evidenced in this case where so many agencies and resources played a significant role in getting us to where we are today. Since the early stages of this investigation, everyone has remained steadfast in our common goal, which is to seek resolution and justice for Samantha, Madeline, the Dean family, and Samantha's extended law enforcement families at the Kyle Police Department and Austin Police Department. At this time, I'm going to turn the podium over to the Special Agent, or Acting Special Agent in Charge, Dan Snow with the FBI, who has a statement that he would like to make.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Sheriff. I want to thank the Texas Rangers, the DA's office, the Sheriff's Department for all their support. And we were asked to assist in the repatriation of VonTrey Clark back to the United States. And I know a lot of people wonder how we do that. We actually have 64 legal attaché offices in over 200 countries. We have agents there that support those countries and their relationship to the United States. We share intelligence, we work criminal matters, and we create these relationships. We've been doing this over the last 70 years. So it's the legal attaché program is very important. Especially when we are dealing with countries that don't have extradition treaties. We develop those relationships as law enforcement to law enforcement so that we can capture violent criminals either from the U.S. that travel there or vice versa. So it's very important that those relationships exist. When the Sheriff and the Texas Rangers asked us to do that, this case, as Samantha was part of our law enforcement family here in Central Texas, we thought we had to go to great lengths to do what we could do to bring back VonTrey Clark in the interest of justice. So that was very important. Also, it sends a message that if you're a violent criminal in the U.S., The FBI has the reach around the world to come get you. And we will use the resources and the relationships we develop to do just that. And we will bring you back for the sake of justice. That's really what I wanted to say today, and I think we'll take some questions after everyone's spoken. Thank you.
At this time, Bastrop County District Attorney Brian Gertz will come to the podium.
I'd like to thank everybody for coming out today as well. This has been a very complicated, factual and jurisdictional investigation and remains very much ongoing investigation and criminal prosecution. We are not going to be fending a lot of questions specifically about this case as to, well, what's going to happen next. We will talk about general procedure, but the state has no interest in trying this case in the media. We're going to reserve our talking for the courtroom where it would be proper, but we would be happy to attempt to field some general questions about procedure and things of that nature. And before we do that, I too want to reiterate what the sheriff has said. There's been much ado about, the inner workings of the various agencies, and the agencies that the sheriff listed have worked wonderfully with us. I want to publicly thank them for the resources that they made available, particularly at the federal level. Our Texas Rangers, they've earned their reputation. They have worked diligently on this case in cooperation with all the other agencies. APD made their resources available to us, which was a great ally in the investigation of this case. And while there is always room for disagreement as to how to proceed on an investigation when you have that many actors, we're here today because we worked successfully, and I'm very proud of that fact. And at this point, if anyone has any, what I'll say, general questions, we'd be happy to attempt to try and answer them.
Brian, what was the most difficult
and just
thing?
one at a time. Rudy?
Brian, what was the most difficult thing that you had to get through to get to this point, other than the fact that VonTrey was on the other side of the planet?
This is a highly complicated, as y'all have seen from the information that is public in the search warrants and the arrest warrants, which are now public. They've been unsealed, by the way. And I will defer to the facts in those, and you will see how complicated it is. Further complicated by jurisdictional matters with another country, which, by the way, nobody thanked Indonesia. Yes. They did a great job. And they worked closely with us, and want to publicly thank them as well. What's been probably the most difficult part is the waiting, which I know y'all have experienced. So, yes.
Brian, I know that this is a decision that likely would be made sometime down the road, but can you talk generally? You have a defendant who is charged with a capital offense. How you and how your department goes about making the decision in terms of whether or not to seek the death penalty?
Thank you. And Tony was asking basically about the procedure involved. Obviously, Mr. Watson and Mr. Clark have been charged with capital murder. Capital murder is an offense in the state of Texas that can carry the death penalty. The decision to seek the death penalty rests solely with me, my office. And so while this is still ongoing, that's a very complicated, not only factual but legal question. It will have to be made in the upcoming months. It will be made before trial, but I'm not going to commit to when or what that decision is. But it's just one of a myriad of legal issues that we'll be facing in the upcoming months.
Why was it sealed? Why was all the information sealed?
Very good question. Why was all the information sealed? Again, a very highly complicated process factually, and the disclosure of the information in the probable cause affidavits for the search warrants or for the arrest warrants were sealed by a judge so as not to compromise the investigation, which was very much ongoing at the time that we sought those warrants. That really is a good tool for law enforcement because it provides an individual who's subject to being investigated from getting the information. And investigations are wonderful things. They cut both ways. An investigation can set you free or it can condemn you. And it's also there on some level to protect the person being investigated. Other questions?
Is Freddie Smith a suspect? Is he being charged with anything in this case?
Freddie Smith has not been charged with anything in this case.
Brian, I know that your office has had an ongoing dialogue with the Dean family. Obviously, these charges, these capital murder charges, is a big turning point in this case. Can you just provide some insight into how they have received this information, this news?
We have kept Mr. and Miss Dean abreast of everything that we possibly could in this case, and they're wonderful people.
Brian,
Yes, Rudy.
it was my understanding that Clark was under a suicide watch in Indonesia. Is he under a suicide watch here?
I'm not aware of him being under a suicide watch in Indonesia. That may very well be the case. I don't know. Have to check with Indonesia on that one. It is the protocol here at the Bastrop County Jail that everyone brought into it is subject to an intake process that involves, shall we say, reviewing that as a possibility.
Sheriff, is he under suicide watch?
No, sir, not at this time. As Brian indicated, when he was brought into the jail, we went through our normal screening process. There was no indication at that time that he needed that type of close watch, but because of his, I guess, stature or his former position, we obviously have to take extra security measures in the jail to ensure his safety.
Single cell?
Yes, sir.
And we talk about extradition, but this was not an extradition. There's no agreement to extradite anybody. Before he was charged, I called it a repatriation. What do we call this?
If you would, because I'm learning this as we go.
Yeah, and I'll talk more about this, but we have several years.
Yourself, sir?
Yeah, Daniel Snow. I'm acting assistant special agent in charge of the FBI in Austin. We had years ago. We realized that we didn't have an extradition treaty with everyone in the world, but we had lots of people that contribute in our legal attaché program, allow us in diplomatic status. So what we did is we created Project Welcome Home. And Project Welcome Home was created to bring back some of these violent criminals and the serious criminals that try to escape our justice system by going overseas. And that project is funded separately so that we have a congressional budget line to go get people from different countries. So this was not an extradition because there's no treaty. So what happened is when the Indonesians, who we have a really good relationship with, reviewed the Interpol Red Notice, which talks about the warrant, what he's wanted for, and they reviewed his documents, they decided to expel him, basically. It's like an immigration violation. So we had canceled his passport, so he had nowhere to go. So he's expelled, so they kept him until we came and got him. And that's actually how it happens.
Agent Snow, it obviously took many days to get VonTrey Clark back into the United States. Would you mind taking us behind the curtain just a little bit about some of the things that were at play in that process?
Well, there's always, like for any of us traveling overseas, you always have, and it's almost a diplomatic mission in a way. So there's lots of bureaucracy, there's lots of weather delays, mechanical problems, things of that nature. So it takes a lot of planning, a lot of pre-planning. To go that far takes lots of pilots and security and things of that nature. If you're bringing a suspect back, and we also were concerned with his prior training as a police officer about security on a long flight like that. So there are things you have to weigh. Do you fly them commercially? Which we transport prisoners around this country commercially all the time. But due to the circumstances, we chose not to do that. We can charter a plane, which is basically what happened.
Brian, are the arrest warrants unsealed now, and when do you hope to take this to grand jury?
The arrest warrants have been unsealed. Both Mr. Watson and Mr. Clark's arrest warrants have been unsealed. They would be available. The probable cause affidavits would be available with the Bastrop County District Clerk's office. I spoke with them earlier. So they will be available this afternoon. They've both been unsealed. As far as an indictment, one of the things that, again, we're not going to talk specifically about this case, but from the date that a person is arrested in the state of Texas on a felony charge, the state has 90 days to indict. Other questions? General questions?
Any charges for anybody who helped VonTrey get to Indonesia in the first place?
At this point, that's not really the focus of this investigation, and I can't say whether or not any of those charges will be forthcoming or not, or whether or not anyone even assisted him. The state of Texas is going to go where the evidence takes us. It's that simple. And if the evidence takes us to the fact that someone assisted him criminally with his walkabout, at that point, we will make a determination.
Sir, we have a little bit of tension with law enforcement. What does this case do to that tension, if anything?
And I'm not sure what tension you're referring to.
Shootings, killings?
I think that this would make it very clear that no one is above prosecution if they commit a crime, whether they're an APD officer or what their particular background is. This case does not parallel some of the media's reporting of the cases that have been going on throughout the country. This is a dramatically different fact pattern.
Can you speak a little bit to the timing of the issuance of the arrest warrant? It went out or was filed once he was in Indonesia. Was there any possibility an arrest warrant might have been filed for Mr. Clark prior to his leaving America?
Clearly, an arrest warrant is something that the state gets to pick the time to seek. And upon knowledge of the fact that he had left, which I think we received that on Monday, July the 13th. I'm sorry, I take that back. We determined on Monday, July the 20th, that he'd left the country. And on Tuesday the 21st, we had a warrant for his arrest for capital murder. But that was the warrant that had been sealed, which a sealed warrant, a sealed indictment, is an instrument that a judge says you shall not disclose the existence of. And if you do, then you can find yourself in front of that judge explaining why you shouldn't go to jail. So that is an instrument that the state routinely uses in these cases.
But my question was more to, was there a possibility of arresting Mr. Clark before he left the country?
Yes.
Why did that not happen?
Well, first off, no one knew he was going to leave the country. And one of the things, and again, I'm talking generally, not specifically about the Clark case, one of the things that comes into play when the state is in the investigative mode, there are no clocks ticking, that the state gets to proceed with the investigation at their own pace. They don't have to rush it because the state wants to get it right. When you rush, mistakes are more prone to be made. So that taking your time on this type of a case, which I've said before, factually was extremely complicated. So taking our time, working the evidence, was very important in this case. Once an individual gets arrested in the state of Texas, the judicial process kicks in. You're out of the investigative mode. And under the judicial process, there are clocks ticking and calendars that the state no longer has control over. It's now a judicial process. Other questions?
So what was the difference between the 20th and the 21st? Why couldn't you make that decision?
Well, one of the differences was he'd left the country. And that was a poorly timed decision on his part. Other questions?
Was an arrest imminent then? And we've all been patient as we could be with this case, and we haven't heard much officially. This is our chance to find out a bit of the timeline. Was your investigation at a point, maybe it's a moot point now, but was your investigation at a point where you were about to make an arrest of Mr. Clark?
That would be a moot point because we have arrested him. And again, we're not going to go back and try this case in the media, much less the strategy that the state employs in the prosecution.
Clarification on the two others. I get where Fisk, her role falls into this. Was Williams at the scene, or is it just strictly just a cohort that was trying to intimidate somebody else?
Again, what we're going to defer to with regard to the specific facts are the facts that are already available in his arrest warrant. And I think that if you'll read those, it's fairly straightforward as to what the state is alleging his role is in this matter.
Going back to what Robert was asking, did you feel like once you had learned he was out of the country that everything had to be ratcheted up a notch, that you had to file charges in order to get the process working that he could be returned to Texas?
Without a warrant for an individual's arrest, the federal process would not have been invoked. You could not invoke it without it.
So is that why that timing happened?
That timing, that decision probably was made more by Mr. Clark's actions to leave. Other questions?
Has that timing at all jeopardized your preparation for the case based on the fact that you then had to get that out?
We continue to prep this case daily so that we'll be ready to indict and we'll be ready for trial. The state's always ready.
And that's the other question. To what degree is the AG's office working with you in the prosecution of this case?
Good question. The AG's office has a division there that is set up to assist with the prosecution of specific cases throughout the state of Texas. I've reached out to them months ago to see if that they would be interested in assisting us with this, because we knew that the demands of this type of case would overwhelm the resources that we have. They will be operating not as attorney pro tems. They will not be in charge of the prosecution. The AG's office, the assistant attorney generals that will be provided to Bastrop County will be functioning under my supervision. They will in essence be assistant DAs in Bastrop County.
How instrumental was the family throughout this investigation, Dean's family?
Wonderful people, very understanding, very patient. They've been kept abreast of everything that's gone on in this case. They've suffered a terrible loss. They were wonderful people. Samantha Dean, wonderful individual. This should not have happened.
Are they still a part of that investigation, still helping you, I guess, bring things to light here?
They have been an integral part of this process from day one. We reached out to them very early. The Sheriff's Office, Lisa Jackson, the Victim Services Coordinator for the Sheriff's Office, my office, myself personally, we've worked very closely with Kim and Kelvin and met with them many times throughout this process.
Has anyone spoken with the family today?
Yes.
And what was their reaction?
I think I'm going to reserve the conversations between me and the Dean family and just keep a private conversation. I think that everyone connected with this case is relieved to be at this point.
Forgive me, I don't know if you've said this before, but is it one murder or is it two?
It's two. Samantha Dean and Madeline Dean, her child.
Can you talk a little bit about how VonTrey was on the flight back?
Again, we're not going to discuss, I'm sorry, any of the specifics of the facts of the case. But he's here.
Are we expecting any more search warrants or any kind of public filings?
Again, the next step in this process that I would be willing to speak about publicly is a public process. It will be the arraignment. At some point, Mr. Clark will be arraigned, which time the court will make sure that he has an attorney and allow him to enter a plea at that time.